Welcome back to TimeOut with the SportsDr podcast, where life, sports, and medicine intersect. We're very glad that you continue to support this podcast. You can get the information on any platform where podcasts are played, as well as getting the video content on YouTube. But if you want to just get one place to find all the content, go to my website at Dr.Derrick, and you will find everything on that website. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. All right, so welcome back to another episode of Time Out with the SportsDr podcast. We have another interesting guest for you today, Mr. Grayson Gunter. He's a former professional athlete in the NFL, also played college football for both University of Arkansas, as well as University of Southern Miss, where he got his Master's of Business Administration. So, hey, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, so we were just talking about you were a Jaguar twice, so you got to end it with being a Jaguar, but you also played for Madison Central in your high school career. Did you play both football and baseball, or what did you play in high school?
Yeah, so I played football, basketball, and baseball up until I was in 10th grade, and just the size of Madison Central, one of the biggest high schools in Mississippi. I kind of figured out that it was going to be tough to do all three, and I knew I was going to have to cut ties with one, and I ended up cutting ties with baseball. And it was tough because it was something that I always played growing up. And I mean, honestly, if you would ask me in, 8th or 9th grade, Grayson, if you're going to be playing one sport in college, what's it going to be? I would have 100% said baseball.
Yeah. So, looking at the screen, you might not be able to tell the size difference, but give us your height and weight. What's your size?
Yeah, so right now I'm 6'5" and a half, 6'6", kind of depending on where you get measured at. Right now I'm about 230 since I've been training for this half marathon, but my playing weight was about 250.
Yeah, so big guy. So were you always kind of pulled to play sports as a kid, or, was it always just an interest, or was it, the coach see you walk down the hall and they're like, you got to be on my team?
Yeah, I didn't really have much choice. Just, whenever you're kind of born with a size like this and you're towering over kids and elementary and middle school, yeah, it's definitely going to be something people try to get you into. But honestly, I didn't really have to have that. My dad was a college athlete at Ole Miss back in the late 80s, and he played outside linebacker there. And so it was just kind of in my DNA. Just the athletics was in my DNA, and I kind of was always, outside, always had the ball, was always with kids in my neighborhood. We were always, looking for something to do sports wise.
Yeah. So, and now your brother's playing college sports as well, right?
That's right. He's at Tulane. He's a redshirt freshman this year. He was part of the team last year that went 11-2. That won the American Athletic Conference and ended up winning the Cotton Bowl too.
Yeah. No, great. So, as always, I tell we have all these conversations in orthopedics about kids and talking to their parents. And early on, he's showing potential and it's a good chance he's going to the pros. But this just shows you genetics is a factor, right? A lot of times if you have professional parents, collegiate parents, it's a good chance the kid may play pro sports. But, my kids are very realistic. They say, look at my parents. So I tell my son, we'll be able to ride it as far as we can, but Dad's not a pro athlete, but you can be a pro in something.
That's right. Well, it definitely doesn't hurt to have the genes, but there's definitely those people that'll go out there and defy the odds. Whenever I was in the league in Jacksonville, there was, people that were out there that looked like, if you saw them on the street, they'd be a high school player. But you get them out there on the field and you're just like, wow, this is why these guys are here. They got heart, they got toughness, and they can play ball too.
Sure. And I think that was a perfect segue, right? So hanging out with you guys, talking about Can't Hurt Me with David Goggins. And, I'd heard about the book. My wife had actually read the book, and I've heard people mention the book before. But, with you and Jake, that time that you said, look, you got to read this book. It's going to change your life. It's going to really mess your head up, So I was like, all right, I've heard this a couple of times now, so let's do it. So, what I really wanted to do is go through this book. I've done several book reviews on the podcast, but I felt like this one deserved to have some dialogue because it's just so many concepts about overcoming odds, overcoming, a poor childhood or overcoming obstacles and really competing with yourself to meet whatever goal you have in place, and being able to defy the odds of even the human body or defy the odds of many roadblocks along the way, and from mental to physical. And it's just very impressive going through that book, and really it makes you question, am I really maximizing my life? So that's kind of how I walked away from this book. So what were some of your overall takes from the
Yeah,
book?
I think the biggest thing for me with David Goggins is just, like you said, overcoming that childhood adversity. There's so many people I feel like in the world today where, they'll have a tough childhood like that and they'll come up and they'll say, oh, well, the deck was stacked against me. The odds were stacked against me. And they'll never really turn out to be anything. And they'll kind of always use that as a crutch. Well, if my family made more money, or if I was, born here, or if I, had this socioeconomic background, things would be different for me. But I think he, is living and breathing proof that, you can go out there, you can defy the odds and really make a name for yourself in whatever, it needs to be. Obviously he didn't, grow up and become a rocket scientist or some, smart mathematician, but what he did was, dive into the depths of the human mind and how far you can push yourself. And, I think he's really changed a lot of lives doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, before everybody go out and say, "Oh, Dr. Derrick told me to read this book," and I cannot believe it. The language is tough, right? And that's one of the things that he's going to talk about. How can I sugarcoat my life? Is it if it wasn't bed of roses when I was growing up? So, yeah, it's tough, but for most adults, it's not any language that you haven't heard before. I think if you can get past that point and really grasp some of the life lessons about the book, it's definitely worth a read, definitely worth a listen. One of the things that jumped out to me at first is I came in with a preconceived notion that he was going to be someone from a poor socioeconomic class, or someone that might have grew up in a rough neighborhood. But the book starts off and he's talking about how, these houses with picket fences and expensive cars in the driveway. And I'm already like, hold on, what's really going on? I thought that he had a rough childhood. But it just shows you that you can't judge the book by its cover, because just because everything looks perfect from the outside, what you didn't know is the childhood mental trauma and abuse that was going on inside the house. So that was one of the first things that jumped out at me.
Yeah, absolutely. For me too. Because it talks about, growing up in that nice neighborhood. But, behind closed doors, what was going on with his mother and, all the trauma that he was going through with that. And for his father to kind of be, a prolific figure in the community. And a lot of people don't know, hey, behind closed doors, there's a lot of domestic abuse. You have the kids up at the skating rink all hours of the night, whether it be, cleaning gum off the bottom of the tables or cleaning the skates. And then they're sleeping in there and they're sleeping underneath everyone partying and drinking all night. And, they're getting up and they're going to school the next day, just like a normal kid, and pressing on is something that it really puts it into perspective.
Yeah. And, that was one thing for years and years and years. He carried that trauma. And I think so many of us carry things from our childhood and never even really want to approach it ourselves, nor do we want to get help. And we just try to shut it away. But even after he achieved all these goals, from becoming a Navy SEAL and basically doing every special ops that you can do in the military, he still was going back to that broken child, which was impressive. And it wasn't until he was able to overcome that he was able to, really find some gratification in all the achievements that he made.
Yeah, that's right. And just going back to what you said earlier, whenever it talks about the language in the book, I think it's kind of interesting and funny at the same time that at the beginning of the book, in the introduction, it says, this is not a self-help book. This is not to make you feel good. This is about unleashing your mind and, kind of unlocking your demons and tapping into that trauma and kind of what makes him tick. And I think it's really interesting. I just got done reading his second book that got published at the end of 2022. It's called Never Finished. I think it's a perfect title for his book because he truly is the definition of never finished. He talks about his knee problems, that he was bone on bone, and that's kind of what he was born with. And people think, oh, Goggins is running all these miles, and this is really the wear and tear on his knees. This is why, he's having so much pain. But he was born like that. And, whenever he went in to get his knee scoped and he encountered a little bit of trouble with it, he said, well, if I can't run, then I'll bike. If I can't bike, then I'll swim. He's constantly finding a way to change the game and revolutionize and really see how far he can push himself.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, pushing himself. I was thinking that in the beginning, okay, he's trying to be a Navy SEAL. And as we know from the book, it took what, 3 times to even get through that. Not because he couldn't physically do it, because he was having health problems, or the one time he messed his knee up, and he kept going back. And that, I think about some of the hardest training that I had to do in life. I often joke about med school. Okay, I did it once, but definitely wouldn't want to do it again. I can only imagine if I made it to graduation day and then had to start over with med school, or start over with some of the other grueling things that I've done in my life. Would I ever go back? And the answer is probably no. And not only did he go back multiple times to become a Navy SEAL, but he went on to, because once he figured out, okay, I can be a Navy SEAL, he said, I want to do special ops for the Army. I want to do, this special op unit and that special op unit, and kept trying to just up the ante, because once he thought that he was going to become a Navy SEAL, he was going to be the toughest, strongest guy in the world. And then once he got there, he still would just kind of diminish that achievement and say there's got to be more. So talk about that feeling of it's got to be more. What did you think about that?
I think, that's just one of the many interesting parts about him. Whenever he talks about always doing more. I was recently listening to an interview, and he was just talking about, Goggins, do you ever feel like, my work here is done? Do you ever feel like you've done enough? And he says at the end of the day, he's doing this for him to see how far he can push himself mentally. But at the same time, he's doing it for other people out there in the world. He'll get emails, tons of emails, calls, people coming up to him in these conferences saying, hey, Goggins, I went from being a couch potato to now I'm running half marathons, I'm running marathons, and it's all because of you. And he talks about, there are days that he doesn't want to get up, and he'll wake up for that 4 a.m., 5 a.m. run. And, he'll wake up and he'll look at his shoes, he says, for 30, 45 minutes to an hour. And he doesn't want to do it, but he says he always does. And I think that's really just playing into that mental discipline that he has, and just kind of going the extra mile for other people.
Yeah. So you've been a collegiate athlete, which is a lot. You have to be a student, you have to be an athlete, you have to push through injuries. You've dealt with injuries. And one parallel he always draws in the book is an athlete with an injury, right? Whether it's a knee injury, a broken bone, or a broken foot, and they say, oh, I got to be a warrior, I got to push through this. But he took it to a whole nother extreme. I mean, he took it to running marathons or doing ultra marathons with broken bones, and almost in kidney failure and different things of that nature. So how did that make you feel as an athlete when you hear that parallel between, pushing through versus what he actually endured?
I think, from being an athlete, obviously, I wasn't in kidney failure or having stress fractures in my feet and running 100 miles. But I think the mental game, it coincides with it so much. In 2020 at Southern Miss, obviously the COVID year affected everyone. But I think it affected Southern Miss more than anything. We lost our head coach after the first game of the season. He was let go. We had an interim coach come in to coach the next 4 or 5 games. He actually took a job at another university that was playing in the spring. We had 3 head coaches in one season. We had numerous games canceled that you would practice all week for. You would go to get on the plane, and they would tell you, hey, guys, we did everything we could. We just couldn't make it work with the numbers. So I think, going through a grueling season like that, a lot of people don't really realize how grueling a football season is, because you
Right.
go from fall camp, you go right into this grueling season, and there's really no breaks, all the way from, end of July until December, January, kind of figuring out. So you definitely have to kind of master the mental part of it, just as much as the physical part.
So talk about, you brought up a great comparison, because that's your that's your graduate year, right? So you've already been in Arkansas. You know that you have a potential of being a professional player. And I'd imagine you went to Southern Miss to put up good numbers so you could be, drafted or picked up as a free agent in the NFL. So what's going through your mind at that point where you're like, okay, this season's kind of going up in smoke and this is my last chance?
Yeah, so it was really tough. I had to do a lot of soul searching, had to do a lot of praying, had to do a lot of talking with my parents. it was an interesting feeling that I had never really experienced before. Growing up, being an athlete, kind of lost my love for the game a little bit. And that was really difficult for me. I had to lean on peers. I had to lean on, the word and people, kind of in my inner circle to kind of get me through that. And, I was going to be granted an extra year with the COVID year, the 2020 year, not counting essentially. And I knew in 2021 I would have an opportunity to come back. I wasn't sure who the coach was going to be. But at the end of the day, I just kind of had to look myself in the mirror and say, is the NFL something you want to do? Obviously I knew it was a possibility. And if it was what I wanted to do, I was going to have to stick it out. I was going to have to be there for my teammates. And I was going to have to give, my absolute best effort every day for me and for them also.
So you did come back in that 2021 season?
I did. I came back in the 2021 season, and I played for Will Hall.
Gotcha. So that was his initial year coaching at Southern Miss, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So one thing about athletics is that people take it for granted. They see you put on your uniform, jog out of the tunnel, and go onto the field. But what they don't know a lot of times is what you're overcoming, right? Even though you might not be injured enough to miss a game, at this point in the year, 6, 7, 8 games into a season, it's very few healthy athletes in the locker room. And, you have to mentally be tough enough to play through some pain, play through some discomfort. If you're hurt enough, we're going to hold you out. But there's no such thing really at this point as having a completely healthy athlete. Everybody's kind of taking some bumps and bruises along the way. So just kind of talk about the mindset of playing through pain and playing through discomfort.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to learn, especially as a college athlete, because the game is just so much more physical. There's a big difference between being hurt and being injured. And I think you have to, kind of have an honest conversation with yourself. Am I hurt? Can I go out there and still give my best effort? And, if you're injured, that you really can't get out there and play. But like you said, there's going to be no one that's 100% in the college football season. You're fighting to be as close to the 100% as you can be. And, you have to really lean on your trainers, your athletic training staff during that point, and you have to be honest with them, and they'll kind of point you in the right direction of, are you going to be able to be safe out there to protect yourself? But I think the biggest thing for me, I know at Southern Miss my last year, I had a turf toe injury and a groin injury that kind of limited me. But I was honest with myself and I said, hey, I can play through this. I think I missed maybe one game to kind of get myself back right and have enough strength to where I could go out there and kind of protect myself if I needed to. And I would kind of have to battle through those weeks. And, whenever it came to Saturday, the trainers would do whatever they needed to do to get me ready to play. But, I think it was, probably midway through the season on, I was really, not anywhere near 100%, but I knew that was my senior year and I was going to have to go out there and grind if I wanted to be on the field.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you mentioned, leaning on your staff, and it's really a relationship because I have to know as a physician that I'm doing the right thing for you. But at the same time, I have to be lenient enough to understand your predicament. And if it's not something that's going to put you in jeopardy of further injury, there's a little leeway there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being transparent, with the training staff is the biggest thing. You guys know more than anyone, y'all are there to help, but at the same time, you're not mind readers.
Right.
You have to go and you have to be transparent and you have to be honest and know that, you always have the athlete's best interest in mind.
Yeah. So it's funny because that's one thing about this podcast and having the genuine conversations with people. The stuff that I said I was going to ask you, we haven't touched any of it yet, right? About, but there are a couple of things about the book that I want to touch on. And one of them is the accountability mirror, because many times just in life in general, in sports or on the job or in relationships, we look for a person to hold us accountable. But David Goggins talks about the accountability mirror. So let's kind of break down that topic. What does that accountability mirror mean, from your perspective and kind of what he talked about? If you're enjoying this episode, don't wait to the end to share it. Share it now. Share this with a friend or a colleague that you think might find value in this information. And then also, make sure that you click and leave us a 5-star review and give us feedback, because we really value your feedback and your input. Now back to the episode.
Yeah, I just think, it just kind of, at the end of the day, you just got to be truthful to yourself. After reading the book, it's kind of something that I've taken into account since my playing days are, over. I'm looking for, the next thing that I can conquer, kind of like Goggins says. And this Saturday, I'll be running my first half marathon. And, there's been days where I have not wanted to go out and do it. It's been too hot. I've had a long day at work, but I know there's going to be no one there to push me. And so what I did is I got tape and I put it on my mirror, and I would go 1 mile, 2 mile, three, all the way down to 13. And every time I would, rip that piece of tape off whenever whenever I conquered that mile. And that was something that it kind of registered in my mind. It's like, okay, I'm making progress, and this is me doing this. This is no one else holding my hand.
And it just made me laugh because it made me flash back to the book where he was running these marathons, ultra marathons. That's what you're going to look like on Saturday, 230 pounds, running beside the 5'1", 110-pound person. So
Yeah, it'll
you're gonna,
definitely be interesting to see. And that's kind of something that I've had to dial my expectations down a little bit, because it's easy to get online and I'll look at these guys that are running, man, they're running 650 miles, and then they're 5'3", 120 pounds. So
right.
I kind of got
Yeah.
to be real with myself whenever it comes to that.
Yeah. You won't see too many offensive linemen out there chugging along with you, I bet.
That's right. That's right.
And then the other thing, and this will really kind of take reference to playing in the trenches, especially in the SEC, big guys. But let's talk about the taking souls,
Mhm.
where he was talking about during the Navy SEALs training, that everybody there, number one, is in peak condition. Everyone there is hard nosed. The people doing the training, the people that are trying to get into the SEALs, everybody's kind of got this macho attitude. And the taking of souls he talked about with his team is where when it would get really tough and the conditions were the nastiest and everyone was tired and he knew that the commanding officers were trying to break them, that's when he would start to chant louder, or that's when he would try to do an extra rep or try to show that his team had the mental toughness as well as the physical toughness, that they were not going to be denied. So just kind of talk about that concept and kind of how that tied in with your playing days.
Yeah. So whenever you get to the college level, like I was saying earlier, there's going to be so many guys that are just as talented as you. You go from being the guy in high school where, maybe your talent you can get away with, not being as disciplined or not being as tough or physical. Whenever you get to the college level, everyone's just as good or better than you. So what I kind of had to lean on whenever I was, coming in as a freshman, and I was extremely undersized, I would have to lean on just being physical in my mindset of wanting to block. I had a tight ends coach that explained it to me, and it really stuck, and it made sense the older I got. But he said, I can teach you all the technique in the world, but at the end of the day, you got to want to block. And whenever you line up from that guy across from you in those trenches, especially in SEC play, he's got to know that you're coming every single play. And just kind of that taking souls aspect is, if you show, 1 ounce of weakness, or, that you're tired or you're hurt, that's like blood in the water for those guys. So, you may be hurting, you may be tired, but at the end of the day, you can never show it on the field. You can never show weakness to your opponent.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the showing of weakness is one thing, and then at some point, it's funny. Marshawn Lynch made this joke the other day when he's talking about if you hit a man in the mouth repetitively enough, he's going to fold, right? And once you keep showing someone that, hey, no matter what you throw at me, I'm going to keep coming back. Sooner or later, they're going to get tired of trying to break you or find out that, hey, okay, this guy's just crazy. I'm not going to mess with him anymore because it's not fun anymore. So yeah, I think that was also a good parallel to
Yeah,
that.
exactly right.
And then another thing is removing the governor, where he talked about, we have these mental blocks many times. Of course, you're going to be physically tired or physically stressed, but typically your mind tells you to shut down before your body is actually physically unable to complete whatever task it is. So talk about that, removing the governor in your mind to unleash the potential that you didn't really know about.
This is actually one of my favorite things that he talks about in the book, and he relays it into, having the car and everything. He relays it in and kind of paints a really good picture. And it's something that I didn't really notice until I dove into this book and really started figuring out how Goggins thinks about things. But, kind of whenever you're doing a task, and I've kind of been more conscious about this lately since I read the book, but whenever you really step back and think about what you're doing, whether you're running, you're biking, you're swimming, you're just doing whatever it is in your day-to-day job, think about, how does my body feel right now? And, what is my mind telling me? And if you can kind of separate those two things, you'll be shocked and floored about what you can accomplish. And I think Goggins is living proof of that, of what he's done, whether it be, the 100-mile race with no training, or the running with the stress fractures through bad water and 120-degree weather. The human body is so, it can adapt to change, and it can do, way more than people think. And so I think, that would be my challenge to anyone listening or anyone who reads this book. Next time you're doing something, kind of try to separate the two. What is my mind telling me? What's my body? And, always try to go one more.
Yeah, yeah. And if you do that one more enough, you'll be surprised how far that'll take you.
Yeah, absolutely. I know just from, starting my running journey, coming from being a football player and being, 250, 6'5", not the ideal build for a runner. But at the same time, I started out, and, I told myself, I don't know if I'll ever be able to do 3 miles. And then, well, 4 miles seems kind of far, and 5. And then you keep working up the ladder. And, here I am at 10 miles, and, you're looking for more. So,
Yeah.
you can always go that extra step and just, keep pushing yourself.
Yeah. So you have to come back on when you're doing the ultras in a couple of years.
Yeah, we're gonna see what happens with the half marathon, and we'll keep putting one foot in front of the other and see what happens.
There you go. So, and then the other thing is becoming uncommon amongst the uncommon, So it's one thing to be different, but once you reach that top tier, whether it's in professional sports, whether it's in sales, whether it's, corporate as a physician, whatever, once you're to that top tier, like you mentioned with SEC football, everybody's a good athlete. When you get to medical school, everybody's smart. But how do you separate yourself from the cream of the crop, right? And that usually takes a lot of soul searching. It takes some grit. It takes some determination, and it really just takes a attitude of not being denied. So I know for me, when I got to medical school, I was looking around like, wow, I'm no longer the smart kid. Actually, when I got to undergrad, I looked around and said, okay, I'm no longer the token smart kid anymore. So it's going to take more than just my talents and abilities. It's going to take determination. It's going to take discipline, which a lot of people might lack. A lot of people have depended on their talents to get them to where they are. So just talk about that, becoming uncommon amongst the uncommon.
Yeah, so for me, whenever I got to Arkansas my first year, I was kind of hit with that, what we were talking about. Hey, everyone's the man now. I noticed that whenever I first got on campus. And, I wasn't a really highly recruited guy. I was a 3-star recruit, kind of middle of the pack. But whenever I got to Arkansas, I had it made up in my mind that I wasn't going to be one of these guys that comes in and red shirts and waits for their time. And so I tried to see what I could do to differentiate myself from the rest of the guys, whether it be staying after practice, catching extra balls, meeting with the coach extra, kind of getting the game plan down, getting the schemes down. I think that's the biggest thing whenever you transition to the college level, is coaches are going to play guys they trust. Everybody's athletic. Everybody can play the game. That's why you're there. But you have to be able to know what you're doing. You have to be able to think on your feet. And that was going to be the biggest thing for me. So I made a pact with myself that I was going to go in, I was going to learn the playbook. And I got to the point where, during fall camp, I was able to go and meet with guys that were in my class and kind of teach them the playbook, because I had carved out the time in the summer and put the extra hours in to get in the playbook and kind of learn my stuff and know what I was doing. And so that gave me definitely an advantage. And that was one of the reasons I believe that I was able to play and start on special teams and get some offensive snaps as a true freshman in the SEC.
Yeah, and I like the way you said that your advantage was a mental game, right? You studied. So in life, we often think about it's more reps or it's doing more from a physical standpoint, but sometimes it's taking a step back and doing less to actually mentally think about an approach, or mentally make sure that you have clarity on what your why is, or what the goal and that you're trying to achieve, even what it is. because many times you just get so caught up in this rat race of moving and doing and not really know what the main purpose of what you're doing is. So I like that clarity there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, having the big picture and, kind of being in the moment. And because it was a dream of mine coming from high school, I was like, I always wanted to play in the SEC. And you get there and you realize, wow, I'm finally here. Kind of the same thing with the NFL. I was going to give myself every opportunity to be successful from the mental side of things. At the end of the day, you can't really control, physically, you can go out there and you can give your best effort, but you may not make every play, you may not make every catch or tackle or whatever it be. But at the end of the day, you can always be the most prepared and you can always give the best effort 100%.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Totally agree. All right, so on Timeout with the Sports Doctor, this is your final timeout. So we've talked about, David Goggins and his Can't Hurt Me book, as well as the Never Finished book. Or is it Unfinished or Never Finished?
Never finished.
Never Finished. I have to do that, the sequel. But for you, coming through exposure to sports, playing sports at the highest level, and now transitioning from sports to life after sports. And, I talk a lot on this podcast to athletes about the special skill set that you have as an athlete, and from going through the gruel of summer camp and fall camp and playing injured, and those skills that you might not be able to put on a resume, but talk about how what you've endured, during your career, how that sets you up to be successful in the corporate world and, in medical sales and things of that nature that you're doing now.
Yeah. So just coming from football and collegiate sports in general, you're so structured and there's so much of it, balancing between being a student, being an athlete, it's a really big burden, and also trying to have a social life and trying to meet people and trying to live the college experience. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of time management. It takes a lot of being accountable. And I think the biggest thing is, whenever you make it to, as an upperclassman, a lot of those guys that you'll come in with, they'll get weeded out, not because, they weren't the best athlete. I've seen a lot of people that had unlimited athletic potential that just couldn't figure it out off the field. And I think, coming into the professional world, there's so many people, whenever they're hiring, they're looking for former college athletes because they know that, hey, these guys are accountable, they're competitive, they have great time management, and they're responsible. And that's kind of tried and true. You may not be able to prove that on a resume, but I think a lot of people, they see college athlete and they see the years, that maybe you lettered or you played, and they know that, hey, this guy, this girl, they're going to do what they need to do, whether it be, learn or, just be where they're supposed to be at that time. They're going to have it all under control.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I want athletes to hear, that you have a special skill set beyond what we can teach or learn in a classroom, and how that can take you to new heights, in your professional career, as well as just life after sports in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all the young athletes listening, it does go by in a flash. I remember being, that freshman at the bowl game, whenever all the seniors would come up and they would, talk about how much the program meant to them, and freshmen, take advantage of your time. And you're sitting in that chair as an 18-year-old freshman, you're thinking, that'll never be me. I snapped my fingers. Next thing I knew, that was me standing up there, giving my remarks to the program and saying how thankful I was. And that was me out there on senior day, so just for the young athletes and, the people out there that are listening to this, man, just take advantage of your time and really, make the most of what you have in the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for coming on, going through this book, because it's a different spin. Everybody's going to read this book and take something else or take something different away from it. So I think it was really valuable being able to kind of have this dialogue about the book. So thank you for, sharing your experiences and helping others through this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on.
All right. And tell people how they can follow you and kind of keep up with what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I think the best way to follow me right now is I'm probably most active on Instagram. And my Instagram is just Grayson Gunter, no spaces, nothing. So that's where you can find me.
All right, cool. All right, man. Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for continuing to support this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a 5-star review. And if you haven't done so, subscribe so you continue to get the updated episodes. Until later, peace.
Time out with the sports doctor. Keep our head right in the game, we ain't never stopping. You are now tuned in, trust you don't wanna miss. This is where life, sports, and medicine